Before we start, viewer discretion is strongly advised. The following is for educational and entertainment purposes only. This is the verbatim federal courtroom testimony of the Sean Diddy Combs trial. As reported by Inner City Press, the court wasn't expecting him. Reporters didn't even have his name on standby. But when Jim Carrey walked through the courtroom doors, quiet, serious, and wearing none of his signature smiles, the entire gallery froze. Known for his comedy, his masks, his madness, Jim wasn't here to entertain. He was here to confess. What he revealed on the stand wasn't just disturbing, it was devastating. He said he did things he still can't talk about without shaking, that his success didn't come from talent alone, but from compliance. And the man who oversaw it all, Sean Diddy Combs. With his voice trembling, Carrey recalled candle-lit rituals, bathtubs filled with ice, and powerful Hollywood elites who stood by while he was initiated. This wasn't testimony. It was a spiritual purge, and it changed everything. No cameras were ready, no reporters had a seat saved. But when the courtroom doors opened that morning and Jim Carrey silently stepped inside, everything stopped. The man known for his larger-than-life performances, the rubber-faced comedian, the talk show prankster, the man who once made the world laugh with just a grin, didn't look like Jim Carrey at all. He wore a black overcoat, sunglasses, and an expression so hollow it made seasoned journalists shift uncomfortably in their seats. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't joking. He was walking like a man who had come to do something terrifying. The courtroom, already thick with the tension of Diddy's ongoing trial, froze. Even the judge looked up from his notes. One of the bailiffs leaned into the prosecutor's ear. The words, "Jim Carrey is here to testify," echoed like thunder across the federal courtroom. No one had seen this coming. Carrey carried a manila folder tucked under his arm, clutched tightly like a secret he had held on to for decades. His stride was slow, deliberate. Diddy turned around in his chair and stared at him. At first, there was confusion. Then, as Carrey got closer to the witness stand, something in Diddy's eyes shifted, like recognition or dread. "I'm not here for revenge," Jim said softly, removing his sunglasses as he approached the stand. "I'm here to release what I've never said out loud." He raised his right hand, was sworn in, and took a long breath as he sat. For the first time in the trial, the courtroom wasn't waiting on a lawyer, a prosecutor, or a witness on the list. It was waiting on a man who had built his career on laughter to finally stop hiding behind it. What followed would shake the room to its core. "I've done things I can't even say without my voice breaking," Jim said almost in a whisper. And Sean Combs was at the center of it. You could feel the air leave the room. No one moved. No one dared. A few hands went over mouths. One juror had to look away. Carrey gripped the edge of the witness stand with both hands. "What I saw, what I was told to do, what I agreed to, thinking it was part of the climb, it haunts me." The judge leaned in slightly, motioning for him to continue. What Jim Carrey said next would become headline after headline. But in that moment, it was just a man trembling, finally speaking into the silence that had kept him bound for decades. The tension had not let up. No one breathed too loudly. No one interrupted because Jim Carrey, with his face ghostly pale and his voice shaking but steady, had just told the courtroom what Hollywood had always feared he might say. "I was funny, but that wasn't enough." He went back to the late 1980s and early 1990s when he was struggling in LA, performing stand-up at every dark club that would take him. "I was doing impersonations, slapstick, anything that got laughs. I just wanted to make it, and I was told there were people who could help." Carrey said it started with party, private one. Invitations came through intermediary. He described being invited to a house in the Hollywood Hills that belonged to someone with power. That someone, he later learned, was Sean Combs. "I didn't even know who he was at the time." Jim explained he was newer in the music game, but people said he was on the ride, that he had connections not just in music, but in film. Then came the offers. Carrey claimed he was told that in order to be seen he'd need to attend certain gatherings, meet certain people, and if asked, play along. "At first, I thought they meant schmoozing, just social stuff. But then I was told flat out if I wanted access to certain auditions, I'd need to go through Diddy. That's when his voice broke slightly. And I did. I went through him." The courtroom remained still. Carrey described receiving a call from a manager he was desperate to work with. He said there was a role coming up, a big one. Said I was funny, but that others were ahead of me. Unless I made a connection. That connection, he said, led him to an encounter with Diddy. It wasn't a meeting. It wasn't business. It was something else. Then he said it. "I bathed with Sean Combs to get a role." The words hit like a brick. Even the stenographer flinched slightly as she typed. Carrey explained that he was taken to a luxury suite where Diddy was waiting. He described the room in disturbing detail. Soft lighting, candles, a bathtub already filled. I was told it was a cleansing ritual, that if I wanted to be taken seriously in the industry, I had to be comfortable shedding who I used to be. Jim stared down at the table. It was humiliating, but I did it because I thought that's what it took. The judge allowed the testimony to continue, citing its relevance to establishing a pattern of behavior and coercion. Carrey clarified that no explicit threats were made, but the pressure was implied. It wasn't do this or else. It was do this or fade into obscurity. I was made to feel like this was the only door, and Sean Combs was the doorman. He paused, then said something few would ever forget. Hollywood didn't just break me. Did he own me? By this point, even the most skeptical courtroom attendees were struggling to hide their discomfort. No one expected that a man like Jim Carrey, a global icon of laughter and absurdity, would testify about something so deeply disturbing. But his tone was steady and his words were specific. There was no mistaking what he was saying. Jim explained that after he was brought to the suite, he was asked to remove his clothes and step into the bathtub where Diddy was already waiting. He smiled like it was normal. He said, "This is how the great are born. You leave your old self in the water." Carrey said he hesitated, visibly uncomfortable. But the people around him, assistants, industry intermediaries, even a known casting agent, simply waited, silent, watching, not saying a word. "I got in," Jim said barely above a whisper. "I got in because I thought this was some metaphorical thing, some artist's weird ceremony, but it wasn't." He described Diddy asking him personal questions while in the bath about his family, his fears, his limits. It was like being interviewed for a cult, like they were testing how far I'd go to belong. And then, he said, Diddy gave him a final instruction. "If you want the part, wash my back." There were audible gasps from the gallery. Even members of the press looked visibly sick. "I did it," Jim confessed. "I scrubbed the back of a man I barely knew because everyone else around me acted like this was just normal, like this was the final test before they handed me the keys to my career." He described exiting the bath, being handed a robe, and then being escorted to a side room. Inside, he found a copy of the script for The Cable Guy, a bottle of champagne, and a note. "Welcome to the next level." Jim closed his eyes. "That movie changed my life, but it also ruined something inside me. Because now I knew I hadn't made it because I was good. I made it because I submitted." The courtroom sat in stunned silence. What Jim Carrey had just revealed wasn't a crime by legal standards. No force, no threats, no violence, but it was something else. Something just as chilling. It was a system of psychological control. And Diddy, Jim said, wasn't just a participant. He orchestrated it like a high priest, like a puppet master. He looked down at his trembling hands. "I gave up my dignity for a role, and I've been trying to wash it off ever since." By now, the courtroom didn't resemble a place of legal procedure. It felt like a theater of revelation, a long overdue confessional unfolding in real time. And Jim Carrey, still seated at the witness stand, seemed to carry the weight of every soul who had stayed silent for far too long. He leaned forward, fingers trembling slightly, and said what everyone was waiting to hear. The parties were worse. He began by describing the first Diddy party he ever attended. It was 1996, a year before Liar Liar made him a household name. He received a private invitation. No address, just a driver. He was told to wear black. "I thought it was a networking event, but I quickly realized it was something else." Carrey described arriving at a mansion in the Hollywood Hills. The air smelled like incense and something metallic. Phones were confiscated at the entrance. NDA forms were handed out casually like gift bags. And once you walked through the threshold, nothing looked real anymore. There were people in masks, models, athletes, directors, but no one said each other's names. They just nodded like we were all there to perform. He explained how the house had been converted not into a party space, but into a labyrinth, candle-lit corridors, velvet drapes hiding smaller rooms, music looping hypnotically from hidden speakers. I kept waiting for the part where we'd all sit around and talk about projects. But instead, someone offered me a tray of pills and whispered, "Pick your night." He refused, but he stayed. I was too scared to leave. I thought walking out would mean I'd never work again. Then came the part that made the courtroom shift in their seats. There were people being ushered into rooms, male and female. Some looked excited, others looked terrified. I asked someone, "What's going on?" And they said, "This is the second act." He went on to describe a moment where a woman, barely 20, stumbled out of one of the rooms, crying and clutching her dress. No one helped her. No one even looked. It was like everyone had been trained to ignore suffering, like it broke the illusion. Carr's voice lowered as he described walking into one of the back rooms. There, he said he saw a famous comedian lying on a sofa unconscious. Around him were 3 men in suits and 1 woman, all laughing. They were taking pictures, posing with him like it was funny. And at the center of the house, floating between rooms, was Diddy. He never stayed in one room for long, Jim explained. He was like a ghost host, always watching, always checking, like he was making sure the right people were doing the wrong things. The court was silent, not a cough, not a footstep. Carrey ended the section with this line: "It wasn't a party, it was a ceremony, and the cost of admission was your conscience." Jim Carrey didn't stop there. His hands gripped the edges of the witness box like a man bracing for a fall. But the deeper he went, the more he seemed determined to drag the truth out with him, no matter how painful. "You have to understand," he said, scanning the jury. "Everything I saw was tied to Diddy. Every room, every deal, every name I was told to keep quiet about, it always led back to him." He explained how over the years he kept getting invited back. Different locations, same setup, same rules, and the same people. Or at least the same types. Models, executives, influencers, actors, often people just on the cusp of their big break. They'd get you right before you were about to pop. That's when you were most vulnerable, when you still needed them. Carrey described an incident in 2001 where he brought a fellow actor to one of the events. He didn't name the person directly, but said, "You know his face. He's in every comedy you love." That actor allegedly left halfway through the night and never returned. Years later, Jim said he received a message from him that read, "Thanks for not stopping me from leaving. I was about to lose my soul." Then came the chilling part. There were people stationed at every level. Carrey said they weren't just throwing parties. They were collecting information. They were watching who broke the rules, who played along, who needed to be reminded that silence is safer than honesty. He named agents, producers, and even a studio executive who frequently appeared at Diddy's events. They were there to observe. Sometimes they'd leave with tapes, sometimes with contracts. But the deals were made at night, not in boardrooms, but in bedrooms. Carrey testified that one of his most disturbing realizations came during a 2003 encounter. He was at a Diddy-hosted New York penthouse party. There he saw a well-known filmmaker take a young performer into a private lounge. "I knew that kid," Jim said. "He'd just gotten a deal with a record label. He looked terrified, but no one stopped it, not even me." Jim admitted he lived with guilt for not intervening more. "I rationalized it, told myself it was just how this world worked, but it's not, and it never should have been." The courtroom felt like it had shifted from a trial to a reckoning. "I came here to say this under oath," Jim said, "because I don't want to be complicit anymore. I don't want to sit in interviews talking about Ace Ventura while pretending I didn't see the devil behind the curtain." And again, he made it clear that devil was Sean Combs. At this point, some courtroom attendees were visibly shaken. One juror had tears in her eyes. The judge called for a 5-minute recess, but Carrey insisted he continue. "I want to finish," he said. "I've been quiet for too long." The prosecutor gave a silent nod. Jim took a deep breath and began to explain the most painful part of all, the silence. "I didn't speak up because I thought I was crazy," he said. "That's what they make you feel, like you dreamed it all, like you misunderstood everything. And if you try to talk about it, you're branded as paranoid or broken." He described years of internal struggle after Bruce Almighty, after Eternal Sunshine, even after Yes Man. He said he was smiling on red carpets while crumbling inside. "People would tell me, 'You've got it all.' And I'd go home and stare at the wall for hours because I knew how I got it, and I couldn't live with that." Carrey said that when he finally tried to confide in people, agents, therapists, even close friends, he was often met with avoidance. They'd say, "That's just how it is," or worse, "Don't dig that up. It's dangerous." Then he described the hallucinations. "I'd dream of the rooms, the parties, the bathtub. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, thinking I was still in that house. My mind kept replaying it, trying to rewrite it, but it never changed." He said he began to believe he was the problem, that maybe he had consented, maybe he had chosen this life. But after hearing the testimonies of other witnesses like Cassie Ventura and Monique, something snapped into place. They weren't crazy, and neither was I. We were made to feel that way, and that's how the machine survives. The courtroom hung on every word. Harry looked down, his voice cracking again. "I stayed silent because I was afraid I'd lose everything. afraid they'd come after me, afraid no one would believe me, and afraid that if I told the truth, I'd be confirming the nightmare everyone tries to forget." He paused. "But I'm not afraid anymore." By this point in Jim Carr's testimony, the courtroom had stopped functioning like a courtroom. The air felt heavier. No one rustled their papers. No one whispered. All eyes were locked on the man who had once been the face of joy for millions, now delivering a horror story that shook the foundations of the entertainment industry. Jim adjusted the mic. His hands no longer trembled. His voice was calmer, almost eerily steady. What he was about to do, he had been rehearsing in silence for years. "There's a list," he said. He clarified that there was no written list, no document to hand over, but everyone in Hollywood, according to him, knew the list existed. It was an unspoken truth. The ones who always showed up to the parties, the ones who never flinched when things got dark, the ones who protected Diddy, because protecting him meant protecting themselves. And then, without naming anyone directly at first, he described the pattern. You'd see the same faces at every event, the same director, the same handler, big-name actors who had squeaky, clean reputations, but who always seemed to be there when the cameras weren't. They weren't just guests, they were gatekeepers. Finally, he began dropping names. Carrey said that on multiple occasions he saw one now Oscar-winning actor, someone beloved for playing moral heroes, attending what he called backroom initiations. He claimed a major daytime talk show host was once present during an incident involving a young dancer who had passed out and had to be carried out while no one called for help. He also mentioned a well-known music producer who brought new blood to these parties, promising them careers in exchange for silence. But it was the moment when Carrey circled back to Diddy that the courtroom went ice cold. Sean Combs wasn't just at the top of the list. Jim said he made the list. These weren't just people who benefited from the system. He curated the system. He curated them. He said Diddy would move through rooms, introducing the right people, giving subtle nods that meant he's safe or she's in. Carrey claimed these moments were like rituals, moments where trust was silently cemented through complicity. And then he described a particular scene from 2005. "I was at an estate party. The upper floors were blocked off. Someone handed me a key card and said, 'VIP only.' I went upstairs and saw a room filled with masks, not just for fashion, but for anonymity. And there in that room were 5 names you'd recognize instantly. Directors, A-list actors, executives, and at the center of them all was Diddy." According to Carrey, these individuals weren't just partying. They were watching, observing others, deciding who could be trusted, who could be used. The higher you went in that house, Jim said, the lower the morality fell. He looked directly at the jury. These weren't isolated events. These were orchestrated, and Diddy was the conductor. If Jim Carr's earlier testimony had been composed, if trembling honesty had defined his opening remarks, what came next shattered that composure entirely. He paused for a long moment. The silence stretched so long the judge almost asked if he needed a break. Then, with his eyes fixed on some invisible point beyond the courtroom walls, Carrey began to cry. "This is the part that took me the longest to say," he said, voice cracking, "because it sounds insane, but it's true, and I've lived with it for too long." He leaned forward, gripping the edge of the stand. "You don't get famous in this town without getting touched. Maybe not physically, but spiritually, emotionally, mentally. Somewhere, somehow, someone has to get inside you, break something and then remake you in their image." The gallery was frozen. "I thought I could avoid it, that I could smile through it, be the funny guy, be harmless. But when it came time to level up, to go from comic to leading man, I was told I had to pass through the fire. And the man who lit that fire was Sean Combs." He began listing off psychological scars like old war injuries, panic attacks, dissociation, self-loathing. He said there were days on set where he would shoot scenes, make a room laugh, then go to his trailer and sob uncontrollably. "I couldn't tell anyone because if I told someone, it would mean I was weak, and weak people disappear in Hollywood." Carrey revealed that at one point he even considered taking his own life. "There was a moment in 2007 after the number 23 when I thought I was done, not just with acting, but with breathing. I thought, if this is what success feels like, I want no part of it anymore." He described a moment when he saw a photo online, an image from one of Diddy's parties that he didn't know had been taken. In the background, he could see himself drugged out, eyes glazed, next to someone he didn't even remember meeting. That was the moment I realized I wasn't living. I was surviving. The prosecution remained silent. There were no objection, no cross-examination. No one dared interrupt what felt like a man exercising decades of agony in real time. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Jim said, "They took my laughter. They took my light." And the man who held the match was sitting right there at every party, smiling while the rest of us burned. The courtroom was silent, not out of respect, but out of shock. Even Diddy's legal team, who had up to this point interrupted, objected, pushed back on prior testimonies, remained completely still. Whatever they had planned to say, it wouldn't matter now. Jim Carrey had hijacked the room with truth too twisted to be dismissed. He composed himself slowly. No tears now, just a solemn calm. "I don't want him to go to prison for what he did to me," Carrey said, nodding toward Diddy. "I want him to go to prison for what he did to all of us." He described the entertainment industry as a symbiotic parasite feeding on the ambitions of the young, the poor, and the desperate. You think they give you a career because you're talented. That's the lie. They give you the illusion of opportunity, then watch to see what you're willing to trade. He listed names of others who, he claimed, were pressured to play along, many of whom had since faded into obscurity. Some couldn't do it, others tried and broke. The ones who didn't survive weren't weak. They were human. Then one last disturbing revelation. Carrey claimed that before the 2000 MTV Movie Awards, he was approached by someone from Diddy's team with an invitation. It was a coded message, a room number, and a time. "I was told to show up clean. No cologne, just vulnerability." I didn't go. But the next day, my publicist told me I'd been pulled from a major endorsement deal. No reason given. He paused. Sean Combs doesn't need to say the words. He just makes the call. Carrey leaned in, voice now barely audible, but firm. "He made me do it and I'm still paying for it." The judge asked if he had any final words. Jim looked around the room, then spoke to no one and everyone at once. "To anyone watching this, to anyone who thinks I'm exaggerating or delusional, I hope you're right. I hope I'm the crazy one, because if I'm not, then this industry is sicker than anyone ever imagined." And with that, he stepped down. No applause, no outburst, just the echo of one man's truth bouncing off walls that had until now protected the powerful. As he walked out of the courtroom, reporters didn't rush him. No one asked for a selfie. They just watched him walk as if watching someone who had just survived a storm no one else could see. And somewhere behind him, Diddy sat silent. Because in the end, Jim Carrey didn't come to entertain. He came to testify. And what he said will haunt Hollywood forever.